Yes.
I think we're just coming up to 7 o'clock, so we will be broadcasting.
Oh, I got to straighten my tie then.
Thank you. Welcome to Resources Board, everyone, this evening.
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 I haven't got the evacuation procedure anywhere near me, but I don't think we have a planned evacuation this evening. So if we do hear the alarm, then we make our way to the nearest exit, so through there or this way. And our lead officer this evening will be Sue Garner, and we'll go and congregate in Woolpack Way. And staff will go to their normal designated spaces that they wait for to be. And please don't leave the site until you've been seen. Makes it sound like a emergency, doesn't it? Please don't leave the site until you've been accounted for. Thank you. Number 2, apologies for absence this evening. I have apologies from Councillor Davey and Councillor Dervix. I have Councillor Mark Jordan in for Councillor Davey and Hayden Phillips in for Councillor Dervix. Welcome. Next week. Agenda item 3, are there any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests this evening? Nothing, thank you. And agenda item 4, minutes of the previous Resources Board meeting on the 28th of March. To be approved as correct record and signed. Thank you, Councillor Mawson. They've been moved by Councillor Mawson and seconded by Councillor Clues. Thank you. Signed. Thank you. Moving on to 5, public participation. As you can see, we're overwhelmed with members of the public this evening. So we'll move on to agenda item 6. Members' allowances. Thank you.
Second that.
Excuse me, Chair.
Oh,
We'll just note that my name is spelled incorrectly on that report.
oh, you can. Bear with me.
Somebody else get the money then.
You'll have to hand it all back now.
Let's have a look at that. So, recommendation is that to be noted. It's been moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Simpson and seconded by Councillor Moss. But it said your name spelt wrong.
Yes, it's Jordan.
All right. Okay. Okay.
JODDA.
So you can sort that out for us. Thank you. And now moving on to agenda item 7. We have the risk management annual report. And again, our recommendation this evening is to note that. Are there any points anyone wants to raise on this report? Councillor Chambers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I went back to the previous report on this issue of risk management to see whether I could sense any change both in the nature of the risks that were contained in our risk register and also the scoring. And what we've got in front of us today is very similar to what was there a year ago. So it's very difficult as a member to know how much the risk has either increased, decreased, or whether new things have come on stream. So that's my first point in terms of the higher scores that we're seeing in here, of which there are quite a few reds ranging, some of them 16, some of them 12, and the mitigating measures that were put in last year. How we get any kind of sensitive hold on actions that have been taken to help manage these risks and what it is that we'll be looking out for in terms of the mitigating measures that are in more detail in the subsequent tables. And the other point I just wanted to make is that mention is made of the LATCO as being a leisure and environmental services risk. But I do recall that we've debated that this is a corporate issue. It's certainly going to go to several boards. And so I was quite surprised to see that this significant risk, which by definition is the threat that an event or action will affect the council's ability to achieve its objectives and to successfully execute its strategies, that this major area of our responsibility in relation to leisure services is now being going to be handled in a very different way. Money is going to be spent. There are risks around whether the money is actually realised in terms of savings, risks to the service itself, particularly in terms of continuity of staff, and risks in terms of the overall corporate project management of this over this forthcoming year. So I just, it feels like almost like a fossilized document, if I might put it crudely, that hasn't developed very much since last year. And I just find it helpful to have some comments on that if it's to be a useful tool for us to have as a board.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chairman. To a large extent, I agree with Councillor Chambers saying there is risk in everything that we do, and indeed there is risk in the stuff that we don't do, because there's always the opportunity that you forego by not doing something. And to actually make the risk register real, it's got to be a living document. And I think it's important that we're all aware and engaged with it. And actually, my biggest concern here is to have input into it. Because I think members have a view on risk and what is risk just as much as our officers do. So I think it's something that can change over time in its iteration. I think in some parts, when I read the appendices, particularly on D, there were some areas that I thought were different to the coloured index. So some of the colouring seemed at variance to what it said in the appendices. And that could be because in the appendices it's talking about a subset of the risk that's red or orange or whatever it is. But I think it would be a lot worthy, Chairman, to your additional consideration when time allows.
Yeah, absolutely. I quite agree with that, actually. And I think the other thing potentially is that maybe we bring it back to this board more frequently and review those risks as you talk about over the next 12 months, particularly quite a lot on the agenda. Actually, the opportunity that there will be to analyse risk needs to probably be greater and mitigate that. So maybe we could add that into the programme, and I'll take that offline and discuss that with Sue and where some of those things sit. And we had a conversation last week, and I think there are some things that I'd like to add to that risk register, but we need to perhaps explore that a little bit more.
Chair, just come in. I suppose that by way of past explanation is, yes, a lot of the risks are the same, but from our view, they haven't particularly changed. Some of the scoring has changed slightly, but despite some of the action we take to try and manage those risks, there are outside influences which mean the score doesn't change drastically, in our opinion, and clearly it is an officer opinion. Members, as has been said, may take a slightly different approach. Certainly, a number of the actions we take are perhaps reported separately. So, for example, in trying to manage financial risk, you will get various updates, medium-term financial strategies. You will get options being brought forward to try and take some money out of the budget. But we perhaps don't pull it together in the risk formatting quite the way that you perhaps would prefer. Similarly, things like the cyber risk that we have, we've currently taken reports, and you will be hopefully approving the additional funding for a planning system. We need to replace that just as we need to replace the financial system. If we can get new systems in place for next year, then that will help to bring risk down. And that's how we scored it, because we are expecting that control action that we're taking to help to reduce the risk going forward. But I fully accept the point about it. Perhaps would be more helpful if I can put down what's changed from previous years and so forth. Around your comment, Councillor James, about the lack of fair point, a lot of that would fall within the risk around the financial savings, because it's one of a number of initiatives that we are trying to progress in order to achieve a financial reduction. And as you can see from that, we have scored it quite highly. It is currently a red risk. Clearly, it has very specific impact on the leisure services, and so they have also brought it in, if you like, as an operational risk as well. So we are fully aware that it is, could have potentially have quite a lot of impact on the council, and so it has been recognised in a couple of places. Certainly, as Councillor Simpson said, happy to bring the progress report, and we can certainly discuss how we do that so that members feel fully engaged in that as we go through. Oh, excuse me. Water needed.
You all right with that?
Yes.
Councillor Mawson, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just that we also include the retention and recruitment of staff. That's most important as well.
Yeah, and it does highlight that that's been a risk and that's got higher and in that report, hasn't it? Which we're all quite aware of. We see coming through special sub, we see coming through some of the other boards. And I think some of the things that are listed there really aren't a surprise to us because we see some of these things coming through the boards in other ways. But it's seeing that list, and one of the things I'm obviously going to tackle, perhaps and discuss with Sue over the coming months is actually if we split some of that down into, so we've got almost just in sections, financial risk, people risk, and underneath that, perhaps separate it, governance risk, cyber risk, or, risk of fraud. And so where we've got policies that support and when we're updating our systems, for example, we know that executive last week approved the planning system. So, that continues through that process into full council this week as well. That's a control measure that's putting something right, if you like, and correcting something that we've identified that we need to do. And it's understanding that and how they relate. Maybe that might help a little bit more. But that's been moved. Sorry, Councillor Simpson.
Just a small comment, Chairman, that certainly one of the charities I used to be more engaged with than not was anxious to actually get its directors and trustees to be more aware of what the risk. And at the start of every agenda of the trustees meeting, they put the risk register in. Now, I'm not saying that we should necessarily at every meeting have to go through the risk register, particularly at the bottom of it. Most committee reports, there is that section that talks about financial risk and everything else. But I think sometimes where we're going through audit, we need to highlight where the risk is on the register, and what the impact will be of the change that we're looking at. So, like buying Jeff Brown a new pack of pens and what have you to make planning easier. But that will improve the risk of him not losing them.
Yeah. Councillor Humphries, you
Yeah, because I'm taking up Councillor Chambers' historical document. I was reading on page 24 of 108. It says pressure on HRA budgets due to ongoing rent reductions until 2020 and from the rollout of Universal Crescent from September 2018. Is that the legacy? Is it still a problem in 2022, or is it the legacy of what happened up to 2020 that's giving us the pressure now? I didn't quite understand that. Or is it a typo?
I'll let Sue come in on that.
Coming on that. Certainly the ongoing rent reductions is a bit of a legacy thing. Apologies for that. The universal credit, of course, is still rolling out, so that part is still ongoing.
And the other, if I could, one other thing that was going to talk about, North Warwickshire is considered low priority for the allocation of resources. That's our opinion, because commissioned by the PCC and for the use of policing resources, I just like to use that. I'm at a PCC meeting on Thursday, and I was going to bring up the fact that do we consider it's low resources needed, or do they consider it's low resources needed? And if it's that, I'd like a rebate on my precept that I pay to the police for the low resources.
Chair, I can only say that probably my colleagues would always like some more money to spend on these activities, and so it's probably our view that it's low.
I was going to say this is our risk register from our perspective.
Thank you.
As NWBC, just to clarify that isn't somebody else's opinion that's in there.
I think, Chairman, it's our perception of what the risk is.
Yes, it is. And just to follow up on what you said, Councillor Simpson, I think that's in other organisations, they do focus on that. I know that on a monthly basis, in my paid role, I have to provide a risk register every month to the Finance and Audit Committee of that trust, every month, because it's live, it's changing. I want to know what we're doing about it and what those updates deliver and where investment's being put in, what it's delivering and how it's mitigating those risks. So maybe there are things like that we can bring in from other areas and perhaps make this a little bit more live for councillors, so they feel that there's a little bit more responsiveness, perhaps. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded So, and that was by Councillor Simpson and Councillor Moss. All in favour? Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 8, which is the annual Treasury Report 21-22. The board's asked this evening recommendation to the board this evening is A, that the annual Treasury Report be noted and that the annual Treasury Report be approved. Councillor Simpson.
I know I'm getting on a bit, Madam Chairman, and even more forgetful than I used to be. But where did this additional £2 million of short-term funding come from? When did we see that?
Pass that to Sue.
Chair, that came in March for, I think, 1 million for 7 days and 1 million for 10 days of cash flow required, unfortunately. But we kept it as for as short a time as we possibly could.
So I didn't know about it and I haven't forgotten.
No.
When?
No, Chair, you haven't.
Should we have known about it, Chair?
No, Chair, I believe that I have the ability to borrow funds to manage the cash flow set out, I believe, in the Constitution.
Councillor Moss.
Was that, when you say March, was that reflection on people being a little bit tardy in paying their council tax? Or a bit more complicated than that?
Chair, the percentage collection did dip slightly last year, to be fair. We still had good collection rates, but they did dip. But some of it is around not perhaps quite getting our forecasts quite right, unfortunately. Things change as you go along.
Thank you.
And I think it's probably fair to say there that money is available and invested, but it would cost more to take that money out than to borrow for the short-term need. And actually the penalties of taking money out of other funds would be greater than the cost of the borrowing. Is that correct, Sue? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so.
So, Chairman, there's one thing I wasn't quite clear when I read the report in terms of the strategy going forward. I know that we've been making 0.39, which I would say, as usual, well done, it's not the best the market gave me. But it would be good to have a clearer picture in my mind of what we think we're going to be generating over the next short and medium term.
Is that a forecast that you can give, just drop round on email?
Yes, certainly, Chair. I mean, we did make certain assumptions when we put our budget together, which did allow for a greater interest rate of 0.39 staggered over the year. But even since we did that in February, clearly interest rates have changed again, so we'll need revising.
Okay. Okay, well, if there was that hand up?
Yeah, I was going to vote.
Okay, well, I'll move that from the chair then.
I'll second it.
Councillor Simpson, all in favour? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9, which is the internal audit annual report. So again, this evening we're asked to note findings of the assessment of the internal audit function and to consider the summary of internal audit work in Appendix A, and that the Corporate Director Resources overall opinion on the control environment be noted. Any questions on the internal audit report? Councillor Clues, Denise Clues.
Just a question. Do we ever get past satisfactory? Do we?
That's a good question.
Chair, if I may say, yes, we do. And you will see actually there are a couple of the audits where we have. I'm pleased to say that a few have come in as significant.
Well, it is a good piece of work, but yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Sue.
Okay. Are there any other points on the internal audit report? Councillor Simpson.
It's sort of this report and sort of the next one, but I'd like to understand better the relative merits of any particular scheme or any particular internal audit and how some of these are chosen. I mean, I think some of them, I think we'd all agree, is a strategic need to be comfortable with. But some seem to be less central to the running of the authority. So when we get on to the next one, I'll probably ask the same question, but I remember my concern with the internal audit was I do value it. I think it's it really is important. But I cannot, in all honesty, remember a year when our internal audit function in its current guise or the previous one has actually hit its target. And I've got to say, if we are consistently failing to complete all the internal audits that have been set for ourselves, then that's got to go down, if you like, almost to a limited satisfaction that we're actually doing what we should be doing.
It kind of harks back to the previous item that we were talking about, risk management, doesn't it? Because then, it poses an element of governance risk in that risk register, doesn't it then? But I know that there have been issues around the delivery of that internal audit work, and I know that there's been pressure within that department. Is there anything you'd like to say on that?
Yeah, I suppose just to add, really, Chair, if I may, that unfortunately we have a very small team, and it has been severely curtailed by illness, and to a certain extent by the lack of ability to recruit in one particular post. But our remaining team member has got through quite a lot of work. And you will see then, when you look at the two reports together, that those that we haven't got through, they don't get forgotten. We do then carry them forward to the following year, so that we don't miss any particular areas, which I know is perhaps less than satisfactory in some ways, but we will try and get back on terms as soon as we can.
Councillor Simpson.
I was going to behave myself, but I'm being encouraged not to. A satisfactory, I'm looking at the fighter thing. A satisfactory level of assurance again. The council has a zero tolerance approach to fly tipping, and its arrangements for preventing, identifying, clearing, investigating incidents, taking enforcement action are adequate and operating satisfactorily. No, they're not, Chairman. They are absolutely not.
I think that particular one is quite contentious, I agree, because I think we've all seen an increase in fly tipping. And we have talked, haven't we, at CNE, I believe, about with Corporate Director Richard Dobbs about going through and taking a bit more of an approach of reviewing the waste, going through everything, doing fixed penalty notices, and improving and pushing that further, haven't we? So let's see how that one pans out. Satisfactory, because actually one of the things we'd like to see on that one is significant. Because I think our electorate and our residents in North Yorkshire would like to see a marked improvement on fly tipping.
I'll be happy if we've got some winter court.
Thank you. Okay. So that is the internal audit report. Any further points on that?
Well, if I may, Chair, I think what we're coming up against, it goes back to the scoring of 16 against our ability to recruit key staff. And, whether it's the internal audit team or in the case of fly tipping, the reference to streetscape absences, and all the reasons that are given in the risk register about what possibly are the reasons for us not being able to recruit or retain staff. And I mean, I may have missed it and I may not have been at the right board meeting, but I don't have a sense of what the real diagnosis is. And is one of the kind of worries is that we are now getting to the point of being such a small council that our resilience and ability to recruit both the number and scale and level of staff that we need to keep some of these vital functions going, almost we're on a track to inevitable merger if we want to carry on providing the functions of a borough council. And I know, I don't know how many months ago it was that we were on a sort of discussion about mergers and so on with other authorities and back office mergers, but I think we need an action plan around this issue of staff shortages, because we seem to be getting in a number of areas into quite a critical position about our ability to carry on. I don't know how that's being discussed and where it's being discussed, but that's what I read into some of these concerns that are coming through.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's an element of that comes through in all the boards. Where we bought services in from tree services from the county because of retention and recruitment, where we've got people that come through in special sub, from the board, Councillor Clues chairs, in terms of putting additional premium onto roles and responsibilities and agreeing an increase in rates because market rates and going out there into the market to get the quality, the skill and the experience that we're looking for to deliver for North Warwickshire. So I think that yeah, absolutely we need to look at that's a key one because obviously the risk of that runs through everything. It's fundamental. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of Special Sub, I did have a meeting with Kerry and I said, is it the pay scale? And she said, no, it's not just the pay scale. It is all over. We're not the only authority that can't keep staff or get staff. And in the other role of what we've been doing just lately, meeting other authorities and other, mayors and the rest, is one of the biggest things that people talk about is staffing. And we're not the only authority that can't keep them, especially at the higher level. And one of them said they believe that some of those at the higher level scale had 2 years at home, still working, but enjoyed being at home. And I'm now retired and think, I've done my time and that's it. So you can get the lower level ones, but you can't get those with the specific needs that we need. So, I am sure that we are not the only authority that's short on officers. And I know we are really short. And that's not helping our other officers.
No. I think that it highlights the need for some extra work on succession planning and where vacancies and where we've got people ready, maybe ready in 2 years, or ready in 3 years for a more senior role, what we're doing to train, what other things we're doing around that. But obviously that's slightly off topic with this, but I think that's probably worth some level of discussion and we'll go up with Sue and with Steve if that's all right with everyone and feed that back because that will come through special sub from the HR side of things, won't it? So if everyone's happy with the report, or at least happy to note the report, I'll move that from the chair. Seconded by Councillor Clues. All in favour? Thank you. The next item, agenda item 10, is the internal audit plan. So as we've just heard, that things that have been not been audited, internally audited this year, will be in next year's plan, which we've got in front of us here, with the risk score associated with it and the timing of the review. I think one of the other things I would add to this is that it would be quite good to look at the list and maybe consider, have we got a 3-year plan of what then rolls through this hitting month? What comes up next? So one of the questions I had was, where's budgetary control and key financial processes? Are they in, through part of the 3-year internal audit plan that we sort of roll through?
Chair, if I can just answer that one. I'm not sure we've actually written a 3-year plan down, if I'm being honest. Linda, who unfortunately can't be here this evening, would probably be able to answer that. But certainly we do these on a cyclical kind of basis, so we could pull that together quite together. That was what members would like us to do. The financial side of things isn't dealt with quite so much these days by external audit, because the external audit people do quite a lot of work on the financial systems. So it was, in some cases, duplication of work. So they will just look at areas as they feel the need, rather than as a regular thing these days.
Okay. So you don't sort of pick up a topic, if you like, and then sort of check on it in between, potentially. For example, Ben's, for example.
Chair, we do still do, the internal audit team do look at reps and bends and the council tax and NDR systems, very much so, and did some work not too long ago.
Okay.
And did in fact a small additional piece of work last year around one of the grant schemes we were running, just to test our assurance levels on that.
I thought you did, and that's why I wanted to bring it out, because actually when it's not listed, it can be a piece of work that's actually not given the credit. And actually behind the scenes, you are looking at roads and bend systems and council tax systems and grants and things like that. But because it's not listed here, it could perhaps be sort of seen as an oversight in terms of what the board understands. Okay, so that's the plan for the following 12 months. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. So if I'm reading section 2.1, what I'm not getting from this is a measure that goes into the public sector internal audit standards that says how critical that function is to the authority's ability to keep money. I think the criteria that are there, fair enough, I have no issue with any of them. But what I'm looking for is a measure of importance or strategic need, which I'm not sure these collectively give me. They may do, but I just haven't got that in my head as to how are we choosing these. And it could be that that's there, I'm just not interpreting it in the same way.
Sort of proximity to the risk.
Yeah, which are the ones that could cause a significant hit to the authority if there was something wrong in internal audit didn't find it? I think, I'm sure I read it somewhere, I can't see it, that on Appendix A, does the asterisk indicate something that's carried forward from the previous one? So there's a chunk of those in there. It's getting on for half, I think, certainly at the third. My question has got to be, how have we effectively prioritised the relative importance of these? It seems genuinely as though we've got basically, as you'd expect, a quarter of them in quarter one, a quarter, quarter two, quarter three. Not entirely, but more or less. What I'd like to hear is that actually the stuff that we perceive to be the most important is all in quarter one, because on our historic performance, we actually run out of time, we don't get it done. So what I'd like to be assured of is that actually we are prioritising the stuff that is most strategic. But when I start out, the first one's got a risk score of 103. It sort of implies to me that we're not doing that. And so how are we scheduling the work that's to be done, and how are we building into this the risk that it's actually not going to happen? And I'm not trying to pick on individual risks, but I look at the first on the list, cleaning HRA, a risk score of 103 in quarter one. The thing I'd actually say was a bit more important is leisure, a risk score of 242 high in quarter four. Says to me that's going to fall off the end of the list.
Chair, if I may just comment on that. Yes, some of the programme will come very much on to trying to, if you like, spread out some of the audits, because in some cases they involve the same personnel who are also trying to do the day job, so we can try to spread them across the year to some extent. But others, for example, so I think democratic services, we've tried to target for before we get into certain other activities that will come later in the year that might take their time and attention, but to allow, for example, new members of staff to bed in a little bit. So we try and have a mind to the service so that we don't, take more of the resource than we need to carry out the audit. But I think a fair comment, so in some cases, the event stuff, it's because we will get a better picture at the end of the year. So there are a number of criteria we take into account, but perhaps we can include a little bit more in scoring, as in the severity, when we're doing that profile in the future.
Councillor Chambers.
I do think that Councillor Simpson's made a really important point about priorities and capacity to do this. And I just wonder, we're all aware how difficult it is to slough off the things that really aren't that important. They just kind of accrete, don't they, to a list. I think there's about 22 things here. If you really did a couple of things in depth that were absolutely critical to the internal workings of external workings of the Borough Council, and said, let's do just those two in these quarters of the year and phase them in such a way that they will start to deliver important information about the risks that we've identified, then wouldn't that be better than having 22 that continue just to kind of roll forward with asterisks for the following year? Shouldn't we give you the freedom, or give somebody the freedom to say, these ones are actually more important, let's only do 5 and let's not do the 22 that are listed here? I know it's how difficult it is to just say, right, let's stop doing that, but, you know, shouldn't we actually be given permission to do that?
Almost having a more meaningful list.
Yeah, and a more in-depth look at, gives that genuinely matches capacity to do this with the importance of it in terms of, you know, the running of the council.
Just to ask Sue on that then. So in terms of things, you know, what we have to achieve, I'm assuming a lot of this is based on what we have to cover. Or is this what we're choosing to cover?
We do have an element of discretion in the cover, absolutely. I think there is a general intention to try and cover most of the activities that the council undertakes, so that we can be assured there are controls across the council. But we do try and give more time and weight, if you like, to certain the audits that we carry out. And as you said, we do occasionally vary the programme. So, for example, in previous year, you would have seen that we added in an audit on the materials recycling facility, the governance arrangements, because we felt that could be quite difficult if that wasn't set up correctly. And clearly, it's a big investment for the council. So quite a bit of time was spent in doing that particular audit, which to a certain extent is why a couple of these smaller audits got pushed back and why they've been carried forward. And again, I have to be honest, I can't guarantee that all of these won't get pushed back if something else more important comes along. We would try and use some flexibility to vary the programme.
Okay. I think perhaps then the answer to that is actually we revise the programme and take them out, and then put something that's become a higher priority in, as opposed to something always looking like it's slipped. Because that gives perhaps the wrong impression of what we're trying to do. So it's obviously clearly the right thing to do to look at the governance arrangements of the MRF, over and above perhaps some of the other things that have been audited perhaps the prior year, and the governance of that haven't changed. So perhaps this is an opportunity to sort of say, actually, when we revise the programme, that actually we issue a revised programme.
Chair, certainly we can, when we do our half-yearly update, perhaps we can bring a revised programme if that's needed.
Would that be more meaningful?
Things that aren't.
Thank you. Right, so that's the internal audit plan for 2022. With that in mind, and perhaps some revisions to that plan, and looking at what we need to look at in a priority order and to deliver meaningful feedback, are we happy to recommend to the board that the Appendix A is approved and that the work of the County Fraud Officer be noted, which is the recommendation to the board tonight? Okay, so I've got a proposal from Councillor Lawson and a second from Councillor Simpson. All in favour? Thank you. Right, agenda item 11. So this is revisions to the letting scheme and addressing housing needs of refugees and asylum seekers. As you're aware, we've got the Housing Task and Finish group, and we've considered the letting scheme policy, and we've proposed some amendments. That group has proposed some amendments to that. So the recommendation to this board tonight is that the amendments of that letting scheme be considered and agreed, and B, to note that the amended scheme is subject to consultation and that a further report will be submitted when feedback is received from our stakeholders. And then C, to note that the national arrangements for asylum seekers and refugees had implications for additional demand on council property vacancies. Okay, so that be noted. Any questions on Councillor Simpson?
Chair, I'd just like to commend all the members of the Task and Finish group. I think they so far have been doing an excellent job. Looking at the report, they've certainly had their work cut out. There's an awful lot that's been done. So I think all the members and officers deserve thanks for that. When I read through the report, it was very helpful to have the bits in green to enable me to understand where the changes were. So blue.
Yes, that's your printer.
But I thought it was very, very useful, and actually really well done, everybody. And I look forward to the other stuff coming through as the group continues to meet. Could I just be clear, Chairman, that the recommendations in front of us will end up being a resolution, or is this would it end up going to full council? So we're resolving A, B and C.
It's a recommendation to Resources Board, so yes, we're resolving A, B and C.
Then I'll move the recommendation A, B and C.
Okay.
I'd like to second it and echo what Councillor Simpson said. Thank all the task and finish group and other assessment.
Angela will pass that on as well. Thank you, Councillor Hood. And it's possibly worth noting at this point that this was the group that started because Councillor Barry Lees was really pushing the housing agenda, and he chaired this board, this subcommittee, and it, you know, from his energy and his thoughts to alongside Councillor Clues, Councillor Denise Clues, who's subsequently stepped in and chaired recently. I think that's it's delivered some really good outcomes, and hopefully it will continue to do so. Thank you. So I've got a proposer and a seconder. All in favour? Thank you. Agenda item 11. So moving on to agenda item 12. Can I find it at the back of here? So excuse me a second. The Housing Task and Finish Group. So the recommendation to us this evening is to A, that the consideration of the Housing Task and Finish Group be acknowledged and supported, and that B, that the terms of reference of the group be confirmed. Any questions on that one?
Move it.
Thank you, Councillor Mawson. Do I have a second? Councillor Hancock. Thank you very much. All in favour? Yes, thank you very much. Enable them to continue that good work. Thank you. All right, now we have agenda item 13, which is the exclusion of the press and public. So just a recommendation tonight is to consider whether, in accordance with section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, that the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by Schedule 12A to the Act.
Move it.
Thank you, Councillor Mawson, seconded by Councillor Humphrey.